Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as part of Fashion Open Studios' ongoing partnership with Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week Berlin, which will be hosting 3 panel talks on themes of rights, relationships, and revolution. This is the first of the series where we will be talking about rights, specifically human rights and the rights of nature. For those that are not familiar, the rights of nature describes the inherent rights associated with ecosystems and species, similar to the concept of fundamental human rights. And so we will be exploring what makes human rights and the rights of nature interdependent and inseparable from each other. To start, I will introduce myself, and then I will allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and their work. My name is Aditi Meyer, and I'm a sustainable fashion blogger, photojournalist, and labor rights activist. And my work explores the intersections of style, sustainability, and social justice, very much bringing a lens of environmental justice to the work that I do. From there, I'll love to transition to our panelists. And Lavinia, maybe you can start us off with a quick bio of yourself.
Yes, I would love to do that. Thank you very much, Aditi. My name is Lavinia. I'm the head of corporate responsibility of Armed Angels. Armed Angels is an eco and fair fashion brand from Germany. And my work basically is to implement the social and ecological standard requirements on product level and in our supply chain. And eventually, like to kick off the session, I would love to quote one of my favorite quotes from Chico Mendes. I don't know if you guys know them. He was a Brazilian environmental activist fighting for the Amazonian, and he was murdered in 1984 by a Brazilian military group, and it's environmentalism without class struggle. It's just gardening.
I love that quote, one of my favorites as well. Next, I will introduce Lamine and Elena.
Hola, buenas.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, both. Can you both give us a brief? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, of course. We are a Top Manta team. We are in Barcelona, and we are a brand, social brand. We are a social project from who created by the street vendor of Barcelona. We have a union. The name is Sindicato Mantero, or Manteros Union. And we are so glad to be here. For me, it's very important to say we are so smart in Spanish and French and Wolof, but the English is not our best language. Please be patient with us because it's difficult to speak in this language.
Of course. Thank you both so much. And I'm so excited to have you as part of this conversation. Last but not least, we have Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Summers, and I'm the co-founder and the Global Operations Director of Fashion Revolution, which I'm sure most of you know. Fashion Revolution was founded in the wake of the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh in 2013 and has grown to become the world's largest fashion activism movement. And we mobilise citizens, industry and policymakers through our research, education and our advocacy work. And before Fashion Revolution, I had a career as a designer, producer, Panama hat maker for 25 years, working with community groups in the Andean region of Latin America.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carrie. To start off this conversation, I want to bring up an idea that we've seen in the sustainable fashion world, which is we've created this binary between sustainable fashion and ethical fashion. Ethical fashion usually refers to the fair treatment of workers, whereas sustainable fashion nods to the environmental impact of fashion. Of course, we know that these two worlds are deeply, deeply connected, as we will explore in our panel today. So to start, I'll pose a question to all of our panelists. Anyone can start. And that question is, why do you think such a binary has been created between people and the environment within the fashion conversation?
I'm happy to
I can
start
start.
if you want me to.
No, Carrie, please, please.
Okay, well, I think for me, I like to look back at history, and I think I'm like when I was doing my scientific sailing voyage last year, I spent a lot of time looking at the writings of Alexander von Humboldt. And when we look back 200 years, Humboldt observed how the world's desire for colourful clothing brought both poverty and dependence to the local population, but he also saw as well as the people suffering, that the land was suffering, that the soil was being exploited like a mine. And this was all to grow indigo, which can be grown as one of the most sustainable plants. It's a legume. And I think what's interesting about Humboldt is he embraced a multidisciplinary approach. So he looked at art history and poetry and philosophy and politics. They were all a part of his scientific method. And he liked to test his observations as much by his body and his spirit as his mind. And there was a quote which, you've just given me a quote, but one of my favourites is Humboldt, who said, "Everything hangs together. If one thread is pulled, the whole tapestry may unravel." So I think for me, it's this disconnection which is historical. It comes down to the scientists who began to specialise in ever narrowing areas of expertise, and we saw this separation between the science and the arts, the subjective and the objective, and between people and the environment. So we really need industry to rediscover that same sort of multidisciplinary approach which we used to see. So we need the writers and the poets and the designers as much as we need the scientists and the economists, so we can have a holistic approach to these problems, and that's where we need to see the industry moving.
Brilliant. Lavinia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I love that insight from Carrie, and now it gets me thinking. But working for a European fashion brand, I think totally different perspective. But I think there's two big topics. One is marketing, and that's what I'm seeing. What is happening as I'm working at a brand, because everything what has to do with the environmental part can somehow be like measured, and like reductions in terms of water safety, carbon emissions, and so on and so forth, they can be measured and super easily communicated. And this way you create a kind of desire for the end consumer. And everything what has to do with social and ethical working conditions, and also the side of the improvements or what is actually going wrong, is harder to measure and also to communicate. So I see a binary over there when it comes to marketing and sustainability claims. And then on the other side, working for a European brand, I also see a different perception from the end consumer. I'm participating in a lot of panels and so on and so forth, and everybody's always talking about, especially like the Europeans are talking about local production. And somehow I have sometimes the sense that they want the industry eventually to come back to Germany or to France or wherever, but we are not really aware that the textile industry actually is based on exploitation, and even before industrialization. And I sometimes hear end consumers say things like, yes, but when I go to the tailor, or if the garment would have been produced in Germany, I know that the conditions are correct, but subconsciously we are saying that the garment produced by German Maria around the corner has a higher value than produced by Suhina in India.
Yeah, definitely.
It's
And I
that.
think that point, sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I'm finished.
No, I think that's a brilliant point, which is a very natural segue to my next conversation or question, which is about colonialism, which you nodded to, right? The power dynamics that frame this industry. And so, Lamine and Elena, I know that your brand speaks about the impacts of colonialism and how this history of plunder and exploitation has been inherent to both our lands and our bodies. So, can you speak a little more about the impacts that colonialism had on communities and their environment? And you could specifically talk about many of the communities that you work with from Senegal.
Yes, thank you. But we can speak about the first question because we
Yeah,
have
sure.
experience about it, and we have to say that the way we put together the ethical and sustainability in the same place is inviting to the community to the make a responsibility purchase, because it's important for us, for Top Manta brand. The ethical is a vehicle to the sustainability, and we have to say to the puts away all the values of the capitalism, because we are convinced that capitalism is a big problem. The way of the big enterprise, the big corporation manage our resources is very bad, and it's important to be conscious when you get some product for any brand. Okay, and when you talk about the problem in Senegal with the fishers, yes, we have a very strong position about it. Most 30 years ago, the corrupt government from Senegal sell the seas of the multinationals, and this is the reason many people from African countries come to Europe and try to make a very good life here, and it's very difficult because we are not welcome like the multinationals are welcome in Africa.
Yeah, and your brand is very clear about both this oppressive history for migrant communities, for Black communities, and also the present, right? This is not just the past that we're talking about. So, not only does your brand reimagine what an ethical model of production can be, but you're also very intentional about educating your audiences on the socio-political context that migrant and Black communities face. And so, why is it important for you as a brand to speak about these specific realities?
Because we live every day this reality. This is our day. We are foreigners. We are aliens in another country, and we sorry, and we find a lot of problem in the administration to get a paper to get identities, and for us it's very important to show this is the reason of the brand, visibilize the problem when you are foreigner to another country, and try to do the best to show your capacity, and the system don't is not able to get this opportunity to get a better life and improve your condition.
Yes, and I think it's so important to highlight that it is a systemic issue. And this brings up, the idea of power imbalances in our world, which we know that the fashion industry simply recreates. We also know that a lot of Black, Indigenous, and people of color around the world, their cultures have inherently viewed people and the planet as inherently connected. But because of the power dynamics of the fashion industry, the mainstream narrative creates this binary, which is an inherently colonial concept. So, Lavinia and Carrie, I'll bring it back to you. I'd love to know what responsibility you think different actors of fashion have to speak on this power imbalance.
Shall I start?
Yes. Go.
You mean like for a brand in general?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, well, like working for a European brand. Well, first of all, I have to admit that I think this conversation is a little more, let's call it prosperous, or on the screen of everybody. For example, for the US community, right? In Europe, we're like just step by step getting there to understand what does environmental justice mean and what does that mean for our black and indigenous and brown folks who are living with us. And I can tell you that in my opinion, we as a brand or like European brands are not yet there. They do not have the awareness and they are not yet there of defining certain codes of environmental and social justice for their supply chains. We are just starting right now to eventually recruit black and brown models. But this work doesn't stop there. The work is about bringing back the value into the supply chain, and appreciating the work on the ground. And I do believe it starts with the raw material, with the precious raw materials for our precious garments. And in our case, this starts with organic cotton. And we also have to realize that cotton, we cannot talk about a product, it's a commodity. And over there, I see a lot of misleading concepts, I must admit. And I also do not see that we are actually bringing back the value into the supply chain, because globally, small-scale organic cotton farmers or conventional cotton farmers are not receiving the income they should receive for the precious raw material they are producing. So there is a lot to do. I mean, first of all, raising awareness, and secondly, actually implementing certain systems and processes in our companies and in our buying and purchasing practices, so that we eventually, sooner or later, reach this common goal. I hope it
Carrie,
was
do you
not
have
too
anything
superficial.
No, I think that was brilliant. You said it like it is. Carrie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I mean, I guess from my perspective, it's the responsibility of all of the actors, from the trade unions, who are the voice of the producers, all the way through to the citizens, to try to shift this narrative back again to how it should be, how it used to be in some cases, and how it still is in many parts of the world. I mean, as I mentioned, I spent 25 years working with indigenous communities in Mexico in the Andes, and certainly in the sort of in Mexico and in the Andes as well, but in the Andean region in particular, they see everyone in the community as being part of an ILU. It's that basic cell of life, and there's no difference between humans and the natural world. They're completely interdependent on each other, and it's a place of real nurture and regeneration. And it's not surprising that Ecuador was the first country to legally recognise the rights of nature back in 2008, and it was followed shortly afterwards, I think 2 years later, by Bolivia, and that they gave nature back its voice. And in the West, we have more responsibility because we went on that completely different trajectory following the Enlightenment philosophers, and they were really instrumental in the way in which we perceive nature as being something to exploit. They sanctioned our right to exploit nature in order to propel this material progress. They turned nature into a machine, and it's this which is still that dominant narrative which has led us into this mess we're in today with sort of fossil fuels and deforestation, and it's come at such a huge cost. So I think all of us, have a responsibility. There's a fundamental responsibility for governments to make sure that the rights of people and human and the rights of nature are holding more power. And I've been involved in discussions recently. In fact, we had another one last week with the European Parliament, to bring in a rights of nature bill within the EU. We're seeing, I think there's a website which tells you about where rights of nature legislation is happening in different places around the world, and it's happening in sort of smaller scales in some countries and some individual locations, but we really need to see something which is at least Europe wide, and we need legislation with teeth to make sure that nature actually, that we give nature back the voice it should have.
Definitely. I think there definitely needs to be that shift in mainstream consciousness, but also having the legal mechanisms to reinforce that. Lavinia, you have previously worked on the implementation of codes of conduct, textile industry standards, and chemical management. And Carrie, in 2020, you sailed from the Galapagos Island to Easter Island to investigate microplastic and toxic chemical pollution. I bring these two things up because I would love for each of you to speak about the ways you have seen the domains of environmentally conscious production or not environmentally conscious production directly affect the health and safety of workers and people. So Lavinia, if you want to start with the experiences you've seen during your time in this industry, I think that would really help paint this picture very clearly.
Oh yeah, it's such a large and wide topic, like specifically talking about the implementation, for example, of code of conduct, who are basically based on the ILO core conventions, who are then based on the Declaration of the Human Rights of the United Nations. Personally, I mean, it's good that the human rights are there, but obviously, personally, I'm pretty critical with regard to the planners, of the human rights, and that the human like that the United Nations or specifically Western countries are imposing certain goals to countries of the global South, where we actually know it's very, very, very hard to reach them, and then like putting sanctions on them. So this is one of the critical points when it comes to human rights, and I hope that in the near future, when it comes to the point where we are, as Carrie said, trying to do something similar and define something for the rights of nature, that we are going to do a better job, and that we are actually listening to Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and how they are doing it, and that it's not, again, us telling others what to do. Then when it comes to the implementation of code of conduct, or what I've seen in the last 10 to 12 years working in the industry, is that it's only about compliance, and we are only and solely talking about absolute minimum standards. Okay? This applies to the ILO core conventions and each and every code of conduct there is in the world. And the same applies also to ecological production. Okay, so that means when we talk about green or ethical production, it doesn't matter if it's certified or not certified, or if it's compliant. We are solely talking about minimum standards. And when it comes to green production, having nature in mind, we on a large scale, and we didn't reach, I would call it the overall goal, following, for example, the cradle to cradle system, that we are actually and eventually giving back more to nature, having in mind regeneration, than we are actually extracting. And this should be the goal. So I would love the sustainability world of the textile industry, coming from generic sustainability terms via circularity terms, to a point where we can talk about even repair mechanisms, because this is what we have to do to have an actual future.
I'm really glad you brought up the idea of repair, because when we have this mindset of repair in mind, that's when we could actually account for the historical oppressive systems and current oppressive systems beyond just band-aid solutions to this very deep-rooted issue. One thing you did mention was the Isles of Cocoa, if I'm not mistaken. Do you want to expand on what that exactly was, or the Isles of Convention?
The ILO core conventions.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the ILO is the International Labor Organization, which is based in, how do you say that in English? Geneva in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
I do not have in mind when it was founded. I think in 1919, at the end of the First World War. And it's a global institution which defines global labor rights. And for example, they were the ones who defined the first core convention on extensive hours of work, child labor, and so on and so forth. And you have to imagine that all the social code of conduct of all industries in the world are based on the ILO core convention. And then it depends on the country of production if they have ratified these core conventions, if these laws or conventions actually apply. And again, we are really only talking about absolute minimum standards. And I see a big problem over there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's a great action item for folks to read more into if they're interested. So, the ILO. Carrie, do you have anything to add to that as far as your work investigating the impacts of microplastics and chemical pollution?
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I sailed over 2,000 miles last year, just as the pandemic was hitting. I was oblivious to it. I was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean between Galapagos and Rapa Nui Easter Island, which is the remotest inhabited island in the world. And I was carrying out research every day as part of an all-woman scientific research voyage, looking at really the devastating impact of microfibers and toxic chemicals in the ocean, and seeing at first hand the impact. And it was quite shocking. We got into the South Pacific Gyre, and I'd expected to see surface plastic, some of this soup we hear about. There was nothing. I've never seen such a pristine ocean. It was calm, it was blue, and every time we trawled, we put our manta trawl in, we put our Niskin bottle in, we were counting 25, 30, 35, 40 microplastic pieces, microfibers in every single water sample that we were taking. And it isn't just the plastics as well, it's the chemicals which are in and on these plastics. We were also checking for chemical pollution. We were doing air pollution monitoring as well. And there was one statistic I heard before we started, which really shocked me. And Emily Penn, who's the co-founder of X Expedition, had her blood tested for 35 chemicals which are banned by the United Nations. And she found 29 of them inside her body. And these include ones which we typically find in our environment and in our textiles, which are like pesticides, flame retardants, and other chemicals used in the manufacturing process. And one statistic I heard recently in one of the webinars which X Expedition are putting on is that between 1960 and 2015, the worldwide fertility rate has dropped by 50% across all ages. And girls in their mid-20s are now as fertile as their grandmothers were in their 40s. And the reason for this is the toxic chemicals which are in our environment and in every cup of water, every glass of water which we're drinking. And we'd really like to see more action from the big players in the industry. But in our Fashion Transparency Index, we found that only 21% of brands are reporting any steps they're taking to minimise the impact of microfiber shedding. And despite Greenpeace's really hard-fought Detox My Fashion campaign, only a quarter of major brands are publishing a manufacturing restricted substances list. And the textile industry uses something like 15,000 different chemicals, but we have no way of knowing what chemicals are or aren't allowed into our clothing in the production process. So we really need to see more disclosure, and I believe we need legislation to force the companies to disclose what chemicals they are using.
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring that up, because I believe that's one of the least talked about domains of, textiles, especially synthetic textiles, and the ways that those are, at the end of the day, endocrine disruptors and the effect that has on both the producers and the consumers. I want to remind our audience that they can ask questions in the chat, and I'll go ahead and actually pose one of the questions from the audience for Lamine and Elena. So they're asking, Top Monta, can you explain how your business works with respect to human rights and ensuring the right to dignified work and pay? And I think this is a great segue from the question we just asked Lavinia and Carrie.
Yes, our collective in our cooperative, because right now we have a cooperative. It's a worker cooperative, and all the people here is we are migrants, and we try to find a way. We try the find a way to regularize get the paper from the migrants for us. This is the way we do with contract with the for this for the migrants, for street vendor especially. And we are a cooperative without benefits, without profits. All the profit we have, we reinvest, sorry, in our business. In the right now we have a sewing and print screen workshop. Is new, is in another neighborhood here in Barcelona, and right now we work directly. We are 32 workers in our cooperative, in our business, and we have urban fashion clothes. We have a 9 line of different kind of products. We have the sneakers. I don't know if you know our sneakers and our clothes. These are temporal, and this is a temporal and a sporting, and sometimes not so sporting clothes. And we are very proud of us because it's a mix between African and urban Barcelona style. This is almost the style of our clothes.
Yeah, and I encourage everyone to check out Top Manta's website. I have to say, I loved your ad, which is more of a manifesto than an ad about how the fashion industry, especially within shoes, kind of romanticizes narratives of just doing it. And your brand is very clear about the challenges that your community faces and how your brand is a tool to address that. And I also want to say that I had read that your company, which is a cooperative, meaning all the profits go back to pay the salaries. You've employed, yes. It said 25, but now you said 32 employees?
Yes, but not all are employees directly, because not all have a paper, because the way the system here in Barcelona work. Okay, if you are a migrant from Africa or from many parts of the world and you don't have, for example, a family or somebody speak for you. You need to spend 3 years here in Barcelona without opportunity of job on or home or bank account, and it's so difficult. This is the reason the people when come here from Africa have to sail in the streets, and and many and a kind of 50% of our sewing need to spend more time here for get the papers, and after that be our employees.
Yeah, I also read that in addition to your employees, you have regularized 120 undocumented immigrants, which is amazing. So it just goes to show that the work that you're doing with the brand is a tool to look at the very real issues in the community and reinvest that for better. So thank you for sharing that. My next question is for everyone as well, and Elena and Lamine, you can start if you'd like, which is how can we shift the consumer mindset to understand that by protecting nature, we are protecting people and vice versa. So, in other words, how can we allow folks to understand that sustainability is ethics and ethics is sustainability?
Yes. We prepared this question, and okay. Well, the first place, we have to say the rich, self-stylist first world countries cannot base the harmony of their economies on the suffering of countries they call third world. It's not possible. Uh, the countries for Europe or North America go to our countries, not only Africa, South America too, and take our resources for them. Okay, and this provide our people from these resources is not fair. This is the first thing we need to conscious and try to work for this all the communities. The second is we need to put in another side of very far us the value of the capitalism, because it's not possible this kind of equation, big exploitation and maximum benefits and a minimum cost. The we For us this kind of model is not correct, because this is the reason we have a lot of poverty in many parts of the world. And finally, we need to work in the three R's: reduce, recycle, and reuse. In Top Manta, we start with this sentence, this kind of a way to work this year, because we have a purpose for the people. But we this year we put in our process better materials, and try to work with many things we have and reduce the residuos, the waste. Sorry. And we try and invite the community to care our clothes, and invest in them clothes and the product. And always the purchase have to make with conscience, think in the workers, think in the environment, think in the what happened with this product and the life. What can you do with this process when get old? It's very important to think about it.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Elena. Carrie, do you have anything to add as far as how we can get the collective consciousness to understand that sustainability and ethics are inherently interconnected concepts?
Yes, I mean, for me, going back to Humboldt again, sorry, I mean, in terms of shifting behaviour, I believe that we need to do like he did. We need to reconnect the facts with the storytelling. We need to talk as much about our emotions as we do about emissions if we really want to scale up behaviour change and work towards the day when equal rights for people and for nature become a universal standard. Because really, at the end of the day, most of us will only protect what we value and love.
Thank you, Carrie. Lavinia, do you have anything to add?
Well, breaking up with capitalism is a really good start. I really, really, really like that idea. First of all, and then, I mean, I think we have to do the right communication and awareness work, because actually, we know it, we know that regenerative and organic cotton does not contaminate wastewater streams, so food insecurity is lowered. The input of less toxic chemistry and wet processes does not, for example, like I'm sticking with water, okay, because it's one like important parameter for now. The input of not so toxic chemistry in wet processes does not contaminate wastewater streams, and also communities living around industrial areas do not have to suffer. On the other hand, I think it's very, very, very important to realize the fact that a carbon neutral product, because nowadays everything is carbon neutral and everything is focusing on climate and carbon, which is a good thing, doesn't mean that the worker has been paid well in the supply chain. This is this is very important for me, because that is actually something I am a little worried about, because everybody is focusing on carbon emissions, how to reduce them and how to buy themselves out, but we have to acknowledge that this is not enough. And apart from implementing better and greener chemistry and reducing certain energy origins, we have to keep on working, implementing living wages and improving social working conditions in factories worldwide. No priorities set there. We are not the ones to set the priorities, to say gender-based violence is more important than the input of chemicals in production. It's both very important, and we have to improve both.
Mm-hmm. And I think that interconnected nature of all issues is where the industry needs to go towards, because we know we can't buy our way out of this reality. To address this reality is to completely reimagine these systems. So thank you all so much for engaging with me in this discussion. We know that the entire edifice of many of our issues today lie in between land and labor, and body and land, both of which are inherently connected. And extractivism, colonial structures, which inform capitalistic structures, is the core reason for many of these issues today. I don't believe there are any questions in the chat, but while we give a little time for the audience to send any last-minute questions, I wanted to open up to all panelists if we had any concluding words or thoughts or action items for our audience. And if not,
Carrie, I'm with Carrie, like talking to the end consumer. I would love end consumers to ask more critical questions, I mean, I'm working for a brand, but I do think and believe that we brands have to disclose like more information and what we're actually doing, how we do our due diligence checks, in our supply chains on human rights issues and on environmental parameters. So don't be satisfied with a nice sustainability marketing campaign. Ask more questions, because you have the right to receive the answer, because you're actually buying the product,
I agree, and never underestimate your power as a customer of that brand. I think one of the statistics from doing our Fashion Transparency Index research and from talking to a lot of the brands about our work at Fashion Revolution is that it only takes between about 50 and 250 emails on a topic, depending on the size of the brand. But we're talking about these big brands, but 50 to 250 emails for it to get discussed at board level. So we've heard that brands don't take that much notice of petitions, but they don't typically think it's their customer signing it, but they really do take notice of messages which come from their customers, and that's not many messages. If you're really concerned about an issue, to get these brands to take issues like chemicals and microplastic pollution and child labour seriously. So I think our power as customers of the brand carries a lot more weight than sometimes we believe it does, and all of us have the potential to use that voice to bring about change.
And on that note, Carrie, we actually have a question in the audience for you, which is, how did things change when Ecuador gave nature rights in law? And are you optimistic this legislation will happen quickly enough?
I would say probably not enough has changed since that came in terms of legislation in Ecuador, but it is there and it has been invoked, and lawyers are using it, particularly in the cases of oil pollution in the Amazon, with some of the sort of, you know, the better known cases like Texaco. It does give a real opportunity for the law to have teeth, and for nature to be represented by a lawyer in court. So that's what the rights of nature is about. So I think more needs to be done. I don't think the legislation is perfect, and we need to make sure that it's implemented. You know, it's the same with a lot of these brands. You know, brands have policies, but are those policies getting put into practice? So we have the legislation, and we need to be pushing those policymakers into making sure it's implemented. But there are a lot of other countries who are looking at rights of nature legislation. I believe Chile is one of them, where it might even be going through court at the moment. And I know that in countries like Spain, there's certain rivers which have rights of nature legislation. So I'm really hopeful, and I'm engaging with the European Parliament. There is a consultation at the moment, and if I had the link I would put it in the chat, but there's a consultation at the moment that the European Parliament are doing to try to garner people's feedback on rights of nature legislation. So that's certainly something I can share, and really encourage everyone to look for that. I'm sure if you Google rights of nature legislation, you will find it. And it's important that I think all of us or all of you as EU citizens, not really in that boat anymore, being in the UK, you know, make sure that your voices are heard in terms of making sure this sort of policy is being brought in. And we do have power in that respect. I mean, one of the things we're going to be doing at Fashion Revolution next year, which is really exciting, is running a European citizens initiative around living wages. And we need to gather, I think, 1 million signatures across 7 different EU countries. And then that issue of living wages for garment workers has to be discussed in European Parliament. So there are mechanisms there to get these issues discussed if enough people decide it's an important enough issue.
Thank you for that action item. There is one more question that is posed to all of us on this panel, including myself, which is, what inspired you to start your journey to human rights and rights of nature? And I suppose I can start here. I think rights of nature is language that I have not used myself within this journey as much, but it's deeply tied to my work, which always looks to understand the interconnected nature of all systems. And when I entered the sustainable fashion conversation 7-8 years ago, shortly after Rana Plaza, one thing I quickly noticed was the historical amnesia of colonialism and neocolonialism that frame a dominant fashion model that is inherently broken, that cannot be fixed by carbon neutrality, that really needs to go to the source of this oppression and exploitation of both land and labor, raw materials, human labor that are seen as things to extract. And so in that process of unpacking the system, I was naturally led to my own heritage as a South Asian woman, and really learning about traditional ecological knowledge in different contexts around the world. But at its core, I always say sustainability for me was a practice of decolonizing, of unlearning, these mechanistic ways of thinking of how the world should operate. This idea that nature and humans are two separate entities, well, when they're not. So that's a little bit about my own personal journey, but I'd love to pose this question to the rest of our panelists as well. Perfect. Lavinia, do you want to start this question about how your journey began in this space?
Yes, well, it's a very personal question, but I love to answer it. I think my journey started with white saviorism approach, and I think, if I'm honest to myself, it's a very long journey to eventually one day leave the white saviorism footsteps. But after secondary school, I was working for one of the biggest NGOs in the world in a country in the global south, and I realized, I came in contact with the implementation of certain human rights issues on the ground, and I realized, okay, something is going wrong. And that's when I started criticizing, as I said before, the planners of the human rights. And after that, obviously, as we have talked about it, that they should go together. Obviously, I also read a lot about the rights of nature, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. And I just like to emphasize again that I hope implementing and defining rights of nature, which we do not yet have on a global scale, we are not going to do the same mistakes as we did with the implementation of human rights.
Brilliant. Thank
So
you.
I'm on it, understanding it, learning, unlearning. I think, we're all in the process.
Most definitely. Elena and Lamine, do you want to speak on your journey in this space and how you got started?
We try to explain, but for me it's very difficult because I am the last in the board of the union. But Lamine, try to explain if you have if you don't have problem in Spanish, and we have to translate. We try to translate everything. It's okay.
Yes,
Okay.
most definitely.
Bueno, bueno, si hablamos de la relación de la naturaleza y porque hemos elegido hacer una marca que sea una marca ética, ¿no? Bueno, sabemos que todo está relacionado, como lo decimos siempre, ¿no? Los derechos humanos como los derechos de la naturaleza. Pero muchas veces vemos que están protegiendo muchísimo la naturaleza, están protegiendo muchísimo los animales y no hagan caso como están destruyendo, ¿no? A una vida humana. No es importante proteger la naturaleza y destruir la vida humana. No hay importancia. Las dos cosas tienen que ir juntos, ¿no? Porque si, la persona actúa de manera ética, de manera razonable, ¿no? Va a ir directamente a una sostenibilidad de todo lo que le rodea, porque el ser humano está relacionado a todo lo que le rodea, porque si está enferma tiene que tener una planta que tiene que utilizar para curarse. Entonces, todo eso está relacionado. No podemos ir sin la naturaleza y la naturaleza tampoco puede ir sin nosotros. Entonces, tenemos que cuidar bien la vida humana, que el ser humano tiene una vida digna, una vida tranquila, pero también vivir en un ¿cómo se llama? En un ambiente, ¿no? Un ambiente bien protegido, bien cuidado, para cuidarnos bien entre nosotros.
Okay.
We will be quick. In our opinion, if we talk about nature and the relationship with nature and why we chose an ethical brand, we know that everything is related. So human rights and nature rights are related. But what we see is that a lot of times now, animals and nature are protected, but the human life is destroyed. So in our opinion, both things go together. So if one person acts in an ethical way, this automatically will affect everything that surrounds the person. So if we are, for example, if we are sick, if one person gets sick, the person will use a plant to cure themselves. So we see everything as related. So we think that if we take care of the human life and we have a quiet and a life that is worthy to live, this we should also have it in an environment that is protected.
This is very
Brilliant.
much.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, unfortunately, I'm getting word from the host that we have to wrap up this conversation. But thank you all so much. I'm honored to be in the presence of such brilliant minds that are reimagining what not only fashion, but this world can look like as far as our relationship to land and individuals. So thank you all for your time today and have an amazing evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everyone.
thank you.